Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
a lot of veterans that I serve with have already passed away.
Veterans who fought overseas suffer health problems here at home. The protections they'll get under a new law.
The schedule is showing that a bus is going to arrive. It's been scheduled to arrive, and it just doesn't show.
From no-show public transit to safety concerns, the head of the CTA joins us with more on how the agency is addressing all those issues.
A new analysis says Chicago police are arresting thousands more black drivers after traffic stops than they're reporting.
Abortion is one of the greatest atrocities of our day.
Backlash over comments made by Republican candidate for governor Darren Bailey. Our Spotlight Politics team weighs in.
A backstage tour of the city's saltiest new music venue, the old Morton Salt Shed.
The lime, the hibiscus, it just brings it back to summer.
And the hermanos from Hermosa brewing up the flavors of Mexico at Casa Humilde Cerveceria. But first, some of today's top stories. The man accused of the Highland Park mass shooting pleads not guilty. In a brief hearing in Lake County Circuit Court, Robert Cremo III formally entered a not guilty plea 1 week after prosecutors charged him with 117 felony counts related to the attack. 7 people were killed and dozens more wounded in the mass shooting at Highland Park's 4th of July parade. Cremo faces multiple murder, attempted murder, and aggravated battery charges. He could potentially face life in prison if convicted. Prosecutors say the 21-year-old admitted to the shooting when he was arrested by police hours after the attack. Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger says news that a federal grand jury has subpoenaed Pat Cipollone is, quote, probably bad for former President Donald Trump. News broke yesterday that Trump's former White House counsel had been subpoenaed by a grand jury investigating efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Speaking to CNN this morning, Kinzinger, one of 2 Republicans serving on the House committee investigating the January 6 attacks, said the subpoena signals the Justice Department has a, quote, very deep interest in Trump.
This is probably bad for former President Trump. I mean, this is, if he goes in front of the grand jury, it shows that this is more than, what did John Eastman do, the attorney that basically came up with that crazy scheme to overturn the election. I hope Pat Cipollone actually just tells the truth. I have no doubt that he hasn't, but there's no reason to protect particularly criminal behavior or what could potentially be criminal behavior behind executive privilege.
President Joe Biden signs an executive order to help ensure access to abortion. The order helps women travel out of state to have the procedure and ensures health care providers comply with the federal requirement to provide care to women without delay. Biden's action comes just 1 day after voters in Kansas rejected an amendment to the state constitution that would have removed abortion rights protections.
Voters made it clear that politicians should not interfere with the fundamental rights of women. And the voters of Kansas sent a powerful signal that this fall the American people will vote to preserve and protect the right and refuse to let them be ripped away by politicians. And my administration has their back.
And up next, details on new protections for veterans, so please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Troops who've returned to the U.S. after fighting in Vietnam or Iraq may have escaped bullets, IEDs, and other fatal hazards of war. But many are dealing with other complications, and critics say the government has fallen short in taking care of them. Amanda Venicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Yeah, Brandis, Chicagoan Frank Gutierrez is set to retire next month from the military after 20 years of service. He first joined the armed services after graduating high school in 1999. And since he has served in total 5 tours of duty in the Middle East, in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, on top of his full-time job, he's also active in multiple veterans organizations. He says veterans are dealing with a lot: PTSD, transition issues, but also often there are physical health problems.
It's not uncommon for me to come across a veteran with respiratory or cardiovascular, disease. You know, a lot of veterans that I serve with have already passed away due to one or the other and various other cancers that could be linked to burn pit exposure.
Here's another veteran, Ed Farmer, to explain what exactly a burn pit is.
Are located in all sorts of places where military is deployed, and they essentially use it to dispose of garbage, of human waste. So they contain black smoke that if you're deployed in one of those areas, you breathe in. And chemicals, trash, plastic, human excrement, anything and everything they'll throw into a burn pit.
Gutierrez says burn pits are an occupational hazard for modern troops when they are deployed. He says on one tour in Iraq, there was a burn pit hundreds of feet from his trailer.
Yes, there were burn pits around. Yes, we were informed that, you know, the fumes may be hazardous to our health, but a lot of times it's unavoidable. You know, driving through town, burning oil fields.
There's widespread belief that exposure to these burn pits and then the contaminants, the toxic chemicals that they put out is the root cause of veterans' health issues like bronchitis, asthma, and a variety of cancers. Now, another area veteran, Maureen Mickey Magnifico, was not able to talk with me over Zoom, but we did chat about her battle buddy, Corinne Smith. They served together in the U.S. Army in Iraq from 2003 to 2004. Smith later died of a rare form of cancer a decade later in 2013, a cancer that they believe was connected to burn pit exposure. Magnifico says burn pits took her sister in arms and left her best friend's son without his mother. She says the government needs to take responsibility for that. But for a long time, veterans advocates say the government has not been doing so, at least not often enough. Farmer is now a lawyer who helps veterans appeal denials of their disability compensation claims.
We see claims for burn pits very frequently. Most of the time they are denied. I believe over 70% of the time, claims related to burn pits are denied, and that's because the veteran doesn't have the medical evidence to back it up.
Farmer sees it with his own clients, and he also sees the consequences of that. The appeals process of a denied claim can take years.
They have some sort of uncurable cancer. They're terminal, and they believe it's from the burn pits, and it probably is. And like I said, they can't work. They're struggling to provide for their family. And that just shouldn't be the case for veterans. Veterans shouldn't have to struggle to provide for the family because they have a condition that they obtained from serving their country.
Now, the U.S. Senate just passed a measure yesterday evening that Farmer gladly says will cut down potentially on his clients.
The yeas are 86, the nays are 11. Under the previous order requiring 60 votes for the adoption of this motion to concur, the motion is agreed to.
But that motion has been controversial. Veterans groups, aided by talk show host Jon Stewart, have been protesting in Washington for its passage, especially because you've had some Republicans balking at related fiscal concerns. Now, the Honoring Our Pact Act, that is short for Honoring Our Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxics, will make it so veterans who served in certain areas over a period roughly from the 90s on who do have conditions that they're suffering from, like certain cancers and respiratory issues, will have the presumption that those health issues are related to their service and burn pit exposure. That means that they will receive access to health care and also to disabilities financial support. President Joe Biden, who pushed for the laws or pending laws passage, that is expected to sign it as early as next week.
Finally, we're going to do justice to those who we lost, as well as those who are still suffering from being exposed to the burn pits. It's about time.
Gutierrez says after decades of war, he's glad the measure finally passed.
It's always easy to write a check to go to war, but very difficult to write the check to treat the service member when they get home. Politicians in DC can fight over many things, but fighting over taking care of veterans that place their lives on the line for our country shouldn't be one of them. Never.
The PACT Act also extends protections to Vietnam veterans affected by exposure to Agent Orange. With that, Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. And now to Paris and rider concerns for one of Chicago's transit agencies. Paris.
Brandis, public transit is slowly getting back to normal after the pandemic, but the CTA has acknowledged significant problems, from so-called ghost trains and buses that never show up to safety concerns on train platforms. And here to talk about some of the struggles post-pandemic and what is being done to address them is Dorval Carter, president of the Chicago Transit Authority. Dorval Carter, thank you for joining us. Welcome back to Chicago tonight. Obviously, public safety has been top of the mind of CTA users over the past several months. 2 weeks ago, there were 2 stabbings in the span of 3 days. What is the system doing to ensure the safety of riders at this point?
Well, as you know, Paris, the police coverage for CTA is provided by the Chicago Police Department, and we've been working very closely with the police department in terms of deploying additional resources to support our customers and to address the concerns about crime on CTA. In addition to that, CTA is complementing the police department with an additional 200 plus unarmed security guards who are being deployed onto the system to provide additional eyes and ears and coverage throughout the system so that we can try to address some of the challenges that we're facing right now with regards to not just crime, but also just bad behavior and poor conduct that we know is occurring on our system, particularly overnight.
Would you advise those close to you that it is indeed safe to use the CTA to get on the train, especially in later hours in the evening?
Well, you know, I think it's important to remember, Paris, that we carry about 800,000 people a day, which is the equivalent of the city of Denver in terms of population. And crime on CTA is relatively low. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, and certainly one crime is one too many. But as a statistical matter, you're relatively safe on CTA. But having said that, we obviously have to continue to do more to address the crime that is occurring there and find ways to mitigate that.
And you mentioned those plainclothes security guards on the system. Last week we spoke with a community group who told us they didn't like the idea of more police or security on trains. Let's take a look at that.
I think it's important that when we talk about safety that we don't get overly reliant on police and security guards as ways to police and then ultimately criminalize people who we know are having issues.
So putting all the emphasis on security and police, is that the only way to make the system safer?
Well, certainly there's a certain portion of the behavior that's happening on CTA that is being caused by criminal behavior. And I think you do need to have a police presence or some sort of security to deal with that. There's also issues involving mental health and homelessness and other things. We're certainly not looking to criminalize that kind of behavior on CTA, and we are working to develop plans on how we address that type of behavior that isn't focused on police efforts as much as it's focused on social service agencies and others supporting those individuals and getting them the help that they need.
All right, another issue frequently brought up, the service issues, ghost buses and trains, when trains or buses are scheduled to arrive, but then they don't. And let's take a listen to what a community group told us about that last week.
The schedule is showing that a bus is going to arrive. It's been scheduled to arrive, and it just doesn't show. So the transit trackers aren't reflecting the level of service that CTA is able to provide right now.
All right, President Carter, what are the culprits for those issues?
Well, the biggest culprit that we're facing right now is a workforce shortage. I don't have enough employees right now to meet all of my scheduled service, and our bus tracker and train tracker rely to some degree on the schedule to report to our customers what exactly the service is supposed to be. I am working right now to make changes to that technology that will mitigate that issue, but more importantly, I'm really focused on how we increase our workforce and really find a way to get the number of employees that we need back at CTA so that we can provide the level of service that our customers are expecting of us. we're recruiting, we're hiring, we're offering special incentives, we're doing all the things that we can, and I'll be announcing more of that in the next week as we try to basically address what is, quite honestly, a problem that just about every major company in the in the country is facing right now, which is hiring people to come work in their jobs.
Well, and we'll look forward to that announcement. But is there the reason for this mass retirements? Is it folks just choosing to leave the workforce entirely? Sick days?
It is all of the above. We've faced the impact of the Great Resignation. We've had people who have retired. We are continuing to deal with the ongoing effects of the pandemic, and while we had hoped that when the Omicron variant came to an end that we would see our workforce be able to return in full force, the reality is that with these subsequent variants and the things that are impacting our employees, we're continuing to have a increasing and ongoing amount of sick leave that's occurring because of people who are recovering from the virus itself, and that continues to impact my workforce. In addition to the challenges that we have faced filling new vacancies.
All right. Well, last week the leader of the transit union told us that this staff shortage wasn't necessarily unpreventable. Let's take a look.
No, you can't discharge people if you're not replacing people. You can't. People are retiring, but you're not replacing them. Their practice of hiring people, first and foremost, it takes too long.
Certainly he's representing the union. Unions are at odds with the management a lot. But to his point that the CTA didn't plan for this, that they should have figured out a way to replace folks retiring earlier.
Well, we plan for it as well as just about anybody in the entire country planned for it, Paris. And, this isn't a question of whether or not CTA is making the effort to recruit and hire people. We are marketing. We're actively holding job fairs, including job fairs with the union. We are offering up, incentives. We are bringing back retired employees to work part-time. We're doing all the things that we can to fill these vacancies as quickly as possible, but you have to appreciate the fact, and it's happening in the airline industry, it's happening in other transit systems around the country, that the outflow has increased dramatically. We are now fulfilling and filling classes bigger now to go through our training program that we were having during the pre-pandemic. But it takes time to do this, and unfortunately, while we're dealing with this challenge, we have to find other solutions to deal with the reliability challenges that we're facing within our own service.
All right. At the same time, there's a major infrastructure project that's been talked about for many years that does seem to be closer to reality, and that's the $3 billion plus extension of the Red Line down to 130th Street from 95th. You're asking for $2 billion in federal dollars from that infrastructure bill, and then there's a TIF with those residents that live right along the Red Line would pay into that extra TIF to fund this. How close are you to getting shovels in the ground to making this long envisioned project a reality?
Well, we're closer than we've ever been in the history of this city. We clearly need to put the TIF in place in order to provide the non-federal funding for this project. But we have positioned the project and have done the work necessary to be able to go to the federal government and get the almost $2 billion worth of money that we're going to need to make this project happen. But it won't happen until I put the other piece in place, and we're working right now with the city council to start to move forward with the approval of a TIF that would allow us to basically fund the Red Line extension, just like we did to fund the Red Purple Modernization Project on the north side of the city.
Right, there's that TIF. The state legislature passed that transit TIF. Are you saying that city council has to take extra action to approve TIF funding for that Red Line extension south?
Yeah, the legislature just passed and gave the city council the authority to put a TIF into place, but the city council still needs to take action to make that happen. So yeah, we do need city council approval to actually put a TIF in place to actually fund the project.
And there were a couple aldermen in the Sun-Times saying, why does there need to be a TIF? Shouldn't it all be federally funded? What's your response to them?
Well, I have yet to see any project of this magnitude that got 100% federal funding, and I've been in this business for over 30 years. The practical reality is that these projects will not get funded unless you're able to provide a non-federal funding source to support a portion of it. I will point out to you that we're asking for more federal money on this project, but on a percentage basis that we asked for the Red Purple Modernization Project. So we are maximizing as much as possible the amount of federal funding we can get to support the project itself.
And this is so needed because it's a transit desert on the south side from 95th to 130th. Now, are you saying if you do get that TIF approved, that $2 billion in federal funding is a given, or is that going to be a challenge to get that?
Well, we still have to apply to receive the funds. It's a discretionary program that funds these types of projects, but we've done all the hard legwork to do that. We've got all the political support of our Illinois delegation, of the mayor and of the governor behind us, and I'm very confident that this administration will support the type of equity investment that we want to make on the far south side of the city, which, as you rightfully pointed out, is the only portion of the entire city that does not have rail service that supports it. It's something that's long overdue, and it's something that I think the federal government is going to be more than willing to support when the time comes to write the check for us.
All right, CTA President Dorville Carter, thank you as always for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Paris.
And now to Brandis for a look at some alarming findings about traffic stops. Brandis.
Paris, Chicago police officers are arresting thousands more black drivers after traffic stops than they report. That's according to a recent analysis of police data from Block Club Chicago and Injustice Watch. CPD reported finding weapons in 388 traffic stops in 2021, according to the state's Illinois Traffic Stop Study. But journalists analyzing arrests from that year found more than 2,300 people were arrested on gun charges while also being cited for a minor traffic violation during the encounter. Joining us now with more are Pascal Sabino, the West Side reporter with Block Club Chicago, Joshua Levin, staff attorney with the ACLU of Illinois, and Olatunji Obai-Reed, president and CEO of Equiticity. We also reached out to the Chicago Police Department for comment, and they did not respond just yet. Gentlemen, thanks to all of you for being here. Pascal Sabino, starting with you, please. Your research found some very significant racial inequities here. Tell us what you found.
So what we found is that Chicago police, first of all, the strategy of using traffic stops has expanded vastly ever since 2015. While Chicago police has framed in their reporting to state regulators that the impact of this expansion in traffic stops hasn't been that significant, they say that there's only been, less than 400 arrests made following these traffic stops in particular for weapons. We're finding that the impact of this is actually far broader and much more far-reaching than what was initially suggested.
And what kind of differences are you finding in whether contraband is actually found on black motorists versus white motorists?
Well, we're finding that, first of all, traffic stops are disproportionately happening to black motorists. 5 times, black drivers are stopped at 5 times the rate of white drivers. A lot of civil rights advocates, including, as well as people at the Public Defender's Office, say that this is likely a strategy to use pretextual traffic stops to pull over black drivers, search their vehicles to find some kind of contraband. Now, when we look at the arrests are overwhelmingly black drivers who are getting caught with, who are getting arrested largely for illegal gun possession.
Obai-Reed, what's your reaction to these findings?
The Chicago Police Department is a rogue institution in our city that continues to run roughshod through our streets. CPD has a long, flawed history of racial profiling and over-policing and stops that needs to end. It's an institution that refuses to adhere to court-enforced consent decree. It refuses to take direction from mayor after mayor. It's an institution that's flawed, that's fatally flawed, and continuing to act as though, this is just par for the course is continuing to harm black and brown neighborhoods in our city.
Joshua Levin, same question to you. What's your reaction?
So in the state of Illinois, we have had a statute on the books for 17 years that requires every police department in our state to release their data for every individual, every driver that they stop. And the 2021 data that came out shows extremely alarming racial disparities, as Pascal mentioned. So Black drivers in Chicago across the city were stopped 5 times greater rate than white drivers, and Latinx drivers were stopped 2.5 times greater rate than white drivers. And we also see huge racial disparities in which individuals have their vehicles searched by officers, which is a very crucial part of the racial inequality in traffic stops. We see that from the data that Black drivers are asked to have their vehicles searched at a 5 times greater rate than white drivers. And so the data that CPD has released is very alarming, very concerning. And now what we're finding out, if this reporting is correct, is that CPD hasn't even released all of the traffic stop data, which means that the actual reality on the ground for people of color may be even worse than what the publicly disclosed data would suggest.
Obai, are you concerned about traffic stops escalating into something more serious, particularly with regards to potential police violence?
Yes, certainly. We're a founding member of a coalition entitled the Free to Move Coalition, and we are focused on decreasing police stops because we believe in the event we decrease police stops, we have the potential to decrease police violence. Anytime a Black person is stopped by the police, there's a risk that that could lead to police violence.
Pascal, you found that gun arrests went from 2,500 to over 5,500 in 2020, with most gun arrests from traffic stops occurring on the south and west sides. What kind of traffic stops are leading to these gun arrests?
So something that I noted when I spoke to the public defender's office is most of these traffic stops are for minor infractions, driving without a busted taillight, doing a rolling stop. One of the people I spoke to, he was pulled over by police because they said he was obstructing traffic because he pulled over for, he said, a minute or two to wave to a friend and kept moving. And so these traffic stops are not for anything having to do with road safety. And the evidence in that is in the traffic stop study report itself. It shows that over 90% of these traffic stops don't even lead to a ticket. They're not citing people for these traffic stops, which, a lot of the experts I spoke to said this is an indication that these traffic stops are not about traffic safety. These traffic stops are a reason to search somebody's car, potentially without their consent, making up a reason to try to find contraband. And if that's how they're finding contraband, that can potentially be a violation of people's civil and constitutional rights.
And just to be clear, I think, Pascal, both you and Joshua have referred to the traffic stop study, which is a result of the Illinois Traffic and Pedestrian Stop Statistical Study Act, correct?
That's right.
Okay. So, Joshua, we often hear about CPD touting the number of illegal guns that they are taking off the streets in their efforts to call for stricter gun laws. More than 1,100, CPD says, in July alone. Do you think these traffic stops are how they're reaching some of those numbers?
You just have to look at CPD's own data to see very clearly that these traffic stops, mostly of people of color, for very low-level kinds of reasons, are not an effective tool for actually confiscating guns or other kinds of contraband. So again, based on CPD's own data, out of all Black people stopped by CPD, only a fraction of 1%, less than 0.5% of those stops resulted in contraband being found. So I think you're correct that CPD sometimes refers to these kinds of traffic stops as a mechanism to fight crime, but their own data is showing that it is not an effective tool to keep our communities safer. And I would say, on the contrary, that there is a real cost to this kind of race-based policing. This data is not a surprise to people of color in our city who experience these stops as humiliating, as potentially dangerous in terms of potentially resulting in police violence. And so it's not only that they're not doing a lot of good, but there's real harms here.
And for some of them, probably traumatic as well. Pascal, we're just about out of time, about 10 seconds. We have not heard from CPD, but you got reaction from them. Briefly tell us what you heard there.
They said that Chicago police is committed to racial equity, not a whole lot more than that. They have told me that they're not actually using traffic stops as a way of tackling unrelated crime, but I think that the data speaks for itself and shows that the strategies that they're using are disproportionately targeting Black communities.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. My thanks to Pascal Sabino, Joshua Levin, and Olatunji Obai-Reed for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Up next, a backstage tour of Chicago's newest music venue at the old Morton Salt Shed. Stay with us.
We've made it.
Justice Jackson's appointment to the Supreme Court provides a beacon of hope.
Black women are underrepresented. We still rise. We still show up for one another.
It's us investing in the next generation and giving them something to enrich the next generation with.
There's much more ahead on the program, including our Spotlight Politics team on a controversial remark made by a candidate for governor. But first, as far as Chicago icons go, it's not the Water Tower or the Merchandise Mart, but the Morton Salt Shed is familiar to anyone who has seen it just off the Kennedy Expressway on the near north side. Now it is home to the city's newest concert venue, appropriately called the Salt Shed. Producer Mark Vitale toured the newly reimagined building on opening day.
Along Elston Avenue, the familiar rooftop sign is back with a fresh coat of paint. Inside, photographs detail the rebuilding and painting process on the structure built in 1929. But the real attraction is the new outdoor concert venue on a 4-acre site along the Chicago River across from Goose Island. We spoke with one of the key players behind the ambitious project.
I've been driving by this all my life, you know, and when we had the opportunity to take a look at this, we kind of came up with the idea of maybe we can repurpose this into a venue. We started about 3 years ago, been working in earnest for about the last 2 years. Took us almost a year to just clear the place out and get the structure, you know, safe and true. And for the last year, we've kind of been putting it all back together.
We visited while drummer Micaiah McCraven and his band checked the sound for their opening night performance. Upcoming performers include Fleet Foxes, Mountjoy, and Andrew Bird. In the new year, there will be an indoor venue on site as well, with capacity of up to 3,600 people. Outdoors, there's a kind of fairground atmosphere with shops and bars along the midway. And they've kept many of the details that make the site unique.
Well, we tried to keep as much of the, call them relics, as we could. So behind you, behind me, is the old conveyor belt that used to bring the salt in off of the river and then into the sheds. And then all the structure and the walls, more of an archaeological viewing of what's happened here and a little bit of a history of the property.
One thing the workers encountered a lot of, salt.
We do get a lot of salt here. You know, I think we got most of it out, but it even seeps through the floors. It's an iconic structure. It's a wonderful part of Chicago, and it's been really a great opportunity for us to convert it into something that has more of an appropriate use in today's world.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
By the way, the partners behind the Salt Shed also run the Promontory in Hyde Park, Thalia Hall in Pilsen, and Space in Evanston, among many other great venues in the area. They also stress that the Salt Shed is an all-ages venue. And you can find out more about upcoming concerts at the Salt Shed on our website. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, our Spotlight Politics team on Darren Bailey comparing abortions to the Holocaust and the potential political fallout.
The lime, the hibiscus, you know, it just brings it back to summer.
And the hermanos from Hermosa brewing up the flavors of Mexico at Casa Humilde Cerveceria. But first, some more of today's top stories. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi departs Taiwan after a whirlwind visit denounced by Beijing. Pelosi says the purpose of the trip to the island that China regards as a renegade province was to show that the U.S. would not abandon Taiwan.
Today, our delegation, of which I'm very proud, came to Taiwan to make unequivocally clear we will not abandon our commitment to Taiwan, and we are proud of our enduring friendship.
In response to Pelosi's visit, China has launched 4 days of live-fire military exercises in the waters around the island, which Taiwan's defense ministry says is effectively a blockade. Chicago's airports are bouncing back from the pandemic. The Federal Aviation Authority says total flights in and out of O'Hare International Airport were up 22% in the first 6 months of the year compared with the same time last year. O'Hare had more than 348,000 arrivals and departures through June, making it the second busiest U.S. airport after Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson. Traffic is up at Midway Airport, too, with a 19% surge. Electric vehicle owners will soon be able to effortlessly road trip around Lake Michigan. Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin have signed an agreement to create and maintain a network of electric vehicle charging stations all around the lake. Dubbed the Lake Michigan EV Circuit Tour, the aim is to boost tourism by making it easier for EV owners to plan vacations along Lake Michigan's shoreline. The National Weather Service is warning would-be swimmers against taking to Lake Michigan tomorrow. A beach hazard warning will be in effect from Thursday morning through the evening. The National Weather Service says the warning covers beaches in Lake, Northern Cook, and Central Cook counties where waves up to 6 feet and dangerous currents will create life-threatening conditions for swimmers. The service warns people to avoid piers, jetties, breakwalls, and other shoreline structures. A social media video from 2017 lands Republican candidate for Governor Darren Bailey in hot water, and voters send a strong message about abortions. All that and more in tonight's Spotlight Politics. Joining us again are Amanda Vinicky and Paris Schutz. Welcome back, team. So, a video has surfaced where Republican nominee for Governor Darren Bailey compares abortion to the Holocaust. Take a look.
I believe that abortion is one of the greatest atrocities of our day, and I believe it's one of the greatest atrocities probably forever. The attempted extermination of the Jews of World War II, it doesn't even compare on a shadow of the life that has been lost and with abortion since its legalization.
Now, that's a video from 2017. Amanda, the rebukes, though, are universal from the Democrats. What are the Republicans saying?
Universal and strong from Democrats as well as many of their allies. Republicans, well, not quite a monolith, and I think that was evident in the primary that Bailey eventually did win, where you saw a lot of infighting within the GOP. There has not been a response from the state party chair. I've got to say, I haven't called, every Republican member of the state legislature, for example. So it's not as if everybody always issues a reaction to every particular news story. But this is something that you would expect. And in fact, folks are raising their eyebrows and sort of demanding, where is the state party on this? There have been a handful of Republicans. So, for example, Congressman Adam Kinzinger has said that this was cruel for Bailey to have said. You have one of Bailey's former colleagues in the Illinois House, that's Representative Steve Reich, also speaking out about it, saying that Bailey crossed the line. And then also the current leader of the House Republicans, again, Bailey currently a state senator, but had previously served in the House and the General Assembly, speaking out, saying that the Holocaust was one of the greatest human atrocities and that this has no place in public discourse.
Paris, Bailey is blaming the media, saying this is being taken out of context. Explain how this could be taken out of context.
It's kind of hard to understand how it's being taken out of context. It certainly doesn't seem like it is. I mean, the quotes have been pulled from his very statements that we saw there on that Facebook video that was unearthed in 2017. You have his opponent, incumbent Governor J.B. Pritzker, saying that this is, quote, disqualifying. But on the other hand, Governor J.B. Pritzker spent tens of millions of dollars trying to ensure that Darren Bailey would be in this very position as the general election candidate running against him because he thought that Bailey was a more beatable candidate than perhaps Richard Irvin, seen as more moderate. And we've talked about this many times on this show, the fact that this has echoed a strategy by Democrats nationwide, kind of tacitly or quietly or kind of behind the scenes boosting far-right candidates in those primaries MAGA candidates across the country, election deniers, in the hopes that those would be easier candidates to defeat. So you have Democrats universally renouncing this and Pritzker renouncing this, but we have to remember that Pritzker also spent a lot of money helping boost Darren Bailey to be in this position.
Amanda, Paris, I do think, sorry, Brandis, I just want to say, I think it is something, it's valid to continually bring that up, because while it might be a smart strategy politically, it certainly is also a dicey game that could have long-term consequences for both Democrats and depending on, as you noted, Paris, in some states you have election deniers or those who are denying the results of the 2020 election being boosted and potentially going to hold spots as Secretary of States in states where they're going to be making election calls that could have long-term ramifications for democracy, this play.
And now, Bailey, he's also, he made that comment about moving on just, very briefly after the Highland Park shooting, after that happened. Paris, is this just a matter of him speaking without thinking sometimes?
Well, those comments certainly, the timing of that seemed like a planned event, that he had planned before Highland Park had happened. But he made those comments on the same day. It certainly seemed that they might have been a little bit taken out of context. But he did say the phrase, "Let's move on," when this was still raw in everybody's mind. He did apologize for those. I mean, he said, "If I've caused more pain, then that keeps me awake at night." So, it's kind of interesting that these comments, though, the 2017 comments, they were made in 2017. They've been unearthed in the last week. So, you wonder about the timing. This is the stuff that comes out in elections, and, things about people's pasts get scrubbed. And, again, I go back to why Governor Pritzker wanted Darren Bailey to be his opponent, because maybe he knew that there are many kind of questionable things in Bailey's past, and if they come out... I know that folks close to Pritzker have run numbers, and they say they don't think Bailey has a chance in this race. So, for reasons like this, because of controversies in his past.
Now, Jewish Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, she tweeted, quote, "Darren Bailey has spent years sifting between racist and anti-Semitic dog whistles and bullhorns. He's unfit to lead and must be soundly defeated." Amanda, is Representative Schakowsky calling Bailey anti-Semitic?
I mean, basically, yes. And in fact, you have the spokesperson for Governor Pritzker calling him that as well, pointing out that Pritzker, as Paris and I both talked about, did spend millions of dollars to boost that individual, to boost Bailey into getting the nomination. I do have to also comment on the notion of comments being taken out of context. While I don't think that is a credible defense, I nonetheless think that it will certainly hold water with many of Bailey's supporters who think in general that there is a grievance by the media against conservatives, and it sort of carries on the accusations against, quote unquote, the media at large by former President Trump that certainly hold a lot of sway with some voters.
To be fair, this strategy of meddling in the other party's elections and perhaps boosting candidates that you see as unelectable, this has been going on for many election cycles by both parties. So, yes, there's a lot of condemnation for Democrats for boosting some of these people. This is not the first time this has happened. I should make that clear.
So let's shift over to abortion politics, though. President Biden today signing an executive order on abortion the day after Kansas voters resoundingly rejected that amendment restricting abortion. Amanda, tell us about this executive order.
Well, this is something that could have an impact on states such as, Illinois, where we are already seeing a whole lot of out-of-state individuals coming into the state for reproductive health care access as well as access to abortions. And really, it is an order that directs the federal agencies under Biden to help patients as they are crossing states to receive that procedure. And also, really importantly, because, of course, this comes down to money and funding often, that it allows states, again, such as Illinois, presumably going to be taking the administration up on this, to apply for Medicaid waivers to help cover the costs of providing abortions and care to those out-of-state patients. And by the way, it also could help providers to clear up confusion, because that is another element of this, when doctors, providers are under an obligation to help somebody under their care who needs life-saving life-saving procedures and life-saving care, there's confusion. What does that mean, particularly in states where now abortions are banned? We're going to be expecting some sort of rules, and that is going to be based on a federal non-discrimination clause.
Paris, do you think this could mean, that this Kansas vote could mean fewer crowds at Illinois abortion clinics?
The vote on the
Kansas vote. If women who need abortions are having access to them in Kansas,
certainly in Kansas, yeah. I mean, you'll still have women coming from Illinois and Wisconsin, but that vote in Kansas is very interesting. It's being written about a lot today. It proves that if this is an issue as a referendum on the ballot, that the pro-abortion rights crowd is more mobilized, and perhaps Democratic-leaning voters are more mobilized to turn out to vote on that very question to keep abortion legal. What's kind of still in question here is, does that translate to the midterms writ large? Does that mean that the same amount of voters are going to be mobilized to vote for Democrats who they think will, possibly vote in Congress to have legislative protections for abortion nationwide? And I'm not sure that the same amount of voters are going to make that connection, but clearly Democrats want to boost this as a campaign issue, and Republicans are sounding the alarm that perhaps some of these very extreme proposals in states like Texas, where it's a complete ban on abortion and then trying to criminalize women for going out of state, those things might mobilize their base, but those are going to be very, very unpopular for the more mainstream crowd.
Now, Illinois Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy traveled to Taiwan with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Here's what she had to say about the trip.
Today, our delegation, of which I'm very proud, came to Taiwan to make unequivocally clear we will not abandon our commitment to Taiwan, and we are proud of our enduring friendship.
Paris, back to you. What did they accomplish, and why did they take this trip?
Well, I think the point was to just kind of show the support of the United States for Taiwan, a country that Pelosi has said is, leading the way in the Far East on democracy, on free market capitalism, on human rights, on environmentalism. When their big neighbor right across the strait there, China has not done so well in those regards. But you have a lot of. We talked to a couple political scientists last night that wonder about the timing. Why did she need to do this now? Why did Congress need to? What was the point of this right now? Especially since there's some political pressure within China by President Xi there to show a strong and forceful response. Obviously, China believes that Taiwan is not a legitimate separate country. They believe it's a breakaway province that should be reunited with China. And so because of internal politics there, he might need to show a strong response. So you've seen some condemnation about that move. You've also seen some support in an unlikely part of political circles on the right, Republicans praising Pelosi for doing this.
Amanda, the president did not want, as we just heard Paris say, didn't want Speaker Pelosi to take this trip. Why go against the president?
A question that I'm sure everybody, the president himself and everybody in the administration are asking themselves probably as they are pulling their hair out, because this certainly could bring disconcerting waves for both Taiwan, potentially also for the United States, particularly as it is a delicate time diplomatically. It could be that Pelosi may be seeing the end of her speakership, particularly given questions about the outcome and Democrats potentially losing control of the U.S. House in the midterms as she's coming to an end of it, really wanting to make a mark. She also says that this does nothing to interfere with the one China policy, and that this is just standing up for democracy, which the U.S. needs to do and has made a commitment to Taiwan to do. We know that the Biden administration pressured her, as you said, asked her not to. I presume that Pelosi is thinking that it was, however, worth it, and not thinking that the consequences of this trip are going to be anything that will impact the United States too severely. Don't know.
So, Amanda, back to you, because we've only got a few seconds left on this one. Some outspoken prosecutors leaving the Cook County State's Attorney's office quite vocally. Bit of drama in Kim Foxx's office. Is this going to be trouble for her and her reelection?
If she runs again, so she still has another 2 years, but certainly she has a lot of baggage right now. She did the last time around, but was able to get out of a Democratic primary. If you win the primary, you're going to have a good chance in Illinois of winning the general election there, but we're still a ways off. This certainly is a difficult and tough time for her and for her office.
Okay, something to keep an eye on for sure. Our Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Paris Schutz. Thanks, gang. Up next, bottling up memories and the taste of childhood summers. But first, a look at the weather.
For lovers of a craft brew, Chicago's beer steins overflow with options. You can belly up to more than 160 craft breweries in the city. But even here, it's rare to find a microbrew crafted by Latinos. Lucky for Chicagoans, there's a spot that offers brews with all the flavors of Mexico, created by a pair of hermanos from Hermosa. Producer Erica Gunderson hoisted a pint or two at Casa Humilde Cerveceria.
I think that the coolest thing, like when we release a beer, is kind of seeing our generation react to it. And we get so many people, well, all kinds of people, age-wise, where they relate to it so much. The lime, the hibiscus, it just brings it back to summer. It brings it back to all of our summer.
When people try our beer, we want them to help them, like, sometimes bring back their memories, because a lot of ingredients we use, are from our memories, like maize. Maize is such an important ingredient in our culture, so we use maize.
Tip back a cold Casa Humilde cerveza, and you'll get a taste of Mexican foodways in every sip.
This last batch we have, we actually use our own coffee now that we roasted.
Tunas, the prickly pear, hibiscus, the lime. We've used mangoes, we've used piña, we've used pepino. We've used a lot of stuff that just kind of a little nostalgic.
Those flavors, the flavors of a childhood spent playing soccer on the streets of Hermosa and summers spent with family in Durango, form the foundation of Casa Humilde Cerveceria. The craft brewery is headed up by Chicago brothers Jose and Javier Lopez. But back before they were brewers, the brothers say they simply enjoyed craft beer.
Well, Javier kind of got me into craft beer. He was drinking craft beer before me.
Like, really enjoyed it.
And he would have at his house just fridges full of craft beer. Like sometimes he would have no milk, no eggs, but just a fridge full of so many stouts and IPAs.
In the summer of 2015, the brothers turned their shared obsession into a business.
I had a band, so I had a Duranguense band here in Chicago. Did that for about 10 years, and I was kind of done with that. So I told my brother, hey, let's try making beer. I told him $600 and get us like a stovetop kit.
He lied.
Yeah. Glass carboys, we do it on the stove, but that turned into well over like $30,000 in equipment.
We took everything out of the living room, and that was our brew house.
Yeah, we kind of, once we saw everything it takes and what's possible, we kind of went all in. We're like, oh, let's just keep working at it.
After a few years of homebrewing, the Lopez brothers realized their beers had taken on a manifestly Mexican identity.
First name we had kind of when we started homebrewing was Auxiliary Brewing.
That name you couldn't relate to anything from our cultures. It doesn't communicate to the consumer, to our customers, what we want.
They say a rebrand to Casa Humilde better reflected their flavors and their family's values.
Just how it upbringing from our parents, our grandmother, and just taught us to be humble. We help people. We're not expecting nothing in return. Just you give your best, And part of it is we started brewing at home too.
In 2019, the Lopez brothers moved their operations here to District Brew Yards, where beer lovers can sample their flagship brews as well as a few more experimental flavors. That's really good.
We just did a stout for this past winter called horchata. So it's an horchata-inspired stout. It did very well for us. People really enjoyed it. Strong beer, about 8%, but it delivers the full flavor of horchata in it.
Now they're introducing their beers to people from all over the city, broadening the ideas of what cerveza can be.
And with our culture, like a lot of people are used to drinking Tecate and Modelo, all these beers, one of the things we're most proud of, where we can introduce the macro beer drinkers to other styles, other beers.
Getting people to experience a whole different world.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Erica Gunderson.
And earlier this year, Casa Humilde developed limited edition beer flavors honoring artist Frida Kahlo to celebrate an exhibition of her photos at the National Museum of Mexican Art in Pilsen. Tomorrow night, they're hosting a happy hour discussion with the exhibit curators and beer makers at District Brew Yards, featuring those beers for those who'd like a little learning with their lagers. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night at 7. We have a live report from the Highland Park community as part of our In Your Neighborhood series.
And meet a married couple who are taking entrepreneurship to the next level. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm whose attorneys embrace a culture of philanthropy and service